We now start session 2, and we have our first speakers here present, which are Greg Crowther from Everett Community College and Larry Lesser from UTexas at El Paso, and they will be talking about new field follies, mistakes to avoid when embarking on STEM, or should I say STEAM, education research.
Thank you, Raphael. So I'm going to lead us off and kind of give the big picture of this sort of thing, and then we will follow that with some lessons learned from Greg's first attempts. So you get the benefit of both of us. So the first thing to notice is that we all already do scholarly teaching, where you reflect on your course and perhaps the literature. You try some change to make things better. That's like the independent variable. You see if that actually helps some student outcome. Think of that as the dependent variable. But now if we take this process and simply put it through peer review, then you could get some papers out of it. So one type of paper is kind of a teaching tips paper. You know, here's a new activity I think worked. But if you want to go beyond just something like, well, I think it worked, you could do what's called SOTL, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, where you include some evidence. You gather some data on the effect on the learning, and you include some search of the literature so that you're not just doing it in a vacuum. And so the goal is to understand and improve specific teaching and learning practices for your course. There's books on SOTL, by the way, ranging from general, any field, to the second bullet point is pretty much all the STEM field. The third bullet point is an example of something specific to math. So, and I'm sure there's other disciplines that have their own version as well. So there are a lot of guides that have come out in the last decade on this. And so a third type of paper is called DBER, Discipline-Based Education Research. And that is another step more rigorous than the SOTL paper, because it includes, as you see in red, the addition of a theoretical framework, and the focus is on results being generalizable beyond not just your course, but some insight about learning that can apply to other people's courses as well. So that's sort of a very rough continuum you can think of this. Motivations for why you would do this: it's a way to improve your course, obviously. It's a way to increase motivation, to have more awareness of the effect of what you do. Your institution probably has some sort of program review or reviews curriculum from time to time. The results of this would inform that process. You can make a stronger case that what you're doing has broader impact if you apply for grants. And when you put together a dossier to go up for tenure or win some sort of award, this will be a very nice thing to have in there as well. So the steps, basically, you state a research question, you do some literature search, you design a study, but before you collect any data from human subjects that you're planning on publishing, you would need to possibly get IRB approval. That's Institutional Review Board approval, which may also require some training. So every university pretty much will have an IRB person. An individual K-12 school might not, but the school district will have something, and they will probably work with the local university as well. So then after you have that approval, you can collect the data, analyze the data, draw conclusions, and then disseminate. So you first want to fine-tune your research question. So since this is the Voices conference, a lot of people might think a research question would be, well, should we use songs in teaching? Okay, well, the word should implies sort of a value judgment. It's not really researchable. It's a question of values. Now, you could make it a research question by saying, you know, what percentage of teachers agree with this statement? Okay, well, now that's researchable. So maybe you revise that to say, well, do songs improve student learning? Okay, but that's still not specific enough. You need to keep going and refine it further. So you might say, well, what about songs that students create? Does that help student learning of, let's make it specific to a particular topic, like statistics, okay, a particular course. But then how are you going to measure learning? Okay, let's fine tune that. We'll measure it by midterm exam performance. That might be the most convenient measure. But eventually you might feel like, well, but a teacher-made test might not be the most valid instrument. What if there's some validated concept inventory already out there that I could just use? and not have to reinvent the wheel. That would be even better. So that's sort of like some steps you might go through. And your research question will inform whether you use a particular quantitative method or a qualitative method. So just to give you an example of that, if your research question is, does using songs improve student learning? That's kind of a yes or no question. And you could collect, you could have one class that uses songs and one class that doesn't use songs and get some sort of quantitative answer to that. But a qualitative question might be, okay, we pretty much know that it does, but I'm more interested in, well, how? What aspect of using songs is what is doing that, right? So that might be the more interesting question to focus on, and that requires observing and interviews and collecting data that are more about words than numbers, right? And there's specific training that goes to support that kind of research question. Or maybe your question is, do students or maybe teachers enjoy using songs in class? Again, you could do a survey, crunch numbers with some quantitative answer to that. But maybe your real question is, well, why do they enjoy using songs? Is it because it builds community? Is it because it lowers anxiety? Is it because it helps recall? I mean, there's lots of different directions, and you won't get that from just a simple survey unless you really have questions for every possible thing. But if you ask people questions in an interview, you might get much more interesting data. So be prepared to go either way. Maybe a mixed method study where you have both types within the same study is the best yet. When you're ready to disseminate or share it, suppose your STEM discipline is X. Chances are the conference on X has a strand of talks on education. If not, there's probably a separate conference or a journal on X education that you can publish in. There are also conferences on SOTL that cut across all areas that would welcome your presentation. And of course, hopefully there's Voices 2023. We'd love to be able to feature your work a year from now. And so now you've heard the lesser part. And so now we get to hear the greater part as we learn from Greg's grappling when he first entered this realm.
Okay, thanks, Larry. All right. So, great to see you all. So in this part 2, I want to talk about a couple of possible transitions that you might make, in which you might work your way from sort of a teaching tip type approach to SOTL, and then making that transition from SOTL to DBER. So teaching tips to SOTL, quick review of what Larry said. What elements would you add to a teaching tip type approach to make it, to sort of elevate it to the level of SOTL? He mentioned a couple of things. Some sort of understanding of the literature, and also some sort of evidence of learning, right? So keep that in mind as I share with you an attempt of mine to make that transition. So about a decade ago, I wrote this amino acid jazz jingle trying to convey properties of proteins through a song I was very proud of. And so this was the context at the time. I was really thinking hard about prosody, the correspondence of lyrics and musical elements. I wasn't actually teaching any classes regularly at the time. I was a lab researcher, basically. And so I did have this opportunity to teach a special 6-week summer course with high schoolers, but it was sort of covering all of STEM and music in 6 weeks. So it was a pretty diffuse course. And so I saw an opportunity to kind of test this song out. And so I did, and I collected the following data from that. So basically asked the students, the 18 or so students in the class, do you agree with these statements? The exercise helped me learn, I enjoyed this, and or I was bored. So you can see the data that we collected here. And my question to you all, maybe Larry, you can monitor the chat for me, is, this is okay, this is not worthless, but if one could redo this study, how could one have made a stronger transition into SOTL, maybe collecting better, more useful data, perhaps. So please comment in the chat. If you could improve upon this, what would you do?
There's always the question of whether to include neutral as an option to sort of force them to commit.
Okay. So yeah, maybe the survey questions themselves could have been tweaked in ways like that. Other ideas?
Let's see, people are saying perhaps look at students from other schools or different ages, maybe have pre and post measures.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I slipped in there was that, you know, I wasn't doing any regular teaching. I had this somewhat random group of high schoolers, so I tried to use them, but I didn't know a lot about this particular group. And so my song wasn't necessarily well matched to their background or their goals. So it was kind of an awkward fit. And perhaps I should have explored this with certainly more students or just other students who I knew more about. Any other comments, Larry, from the chat or from you?
No other comments for now.
Okay.
Oh, wait, one person says, ask the students which type of music they like before writing the song.
Okay. Yeah, so more student context about like, where are they coming from? What's their experience? Okay. So this, you know, this was ultimately publishable, but I think it could have been a better study, a stronger SOTL study with more planning. And so I want to quickly move on to the SOTL to DBER transition. And again, rhetorically ask you, so what elements do you need to sort of get it to DBER? Remember, Larry said theoretical framework and perhaps more rigorous methods that would be likely to produce generalizable results beyond what's in your classroom. So I think the theoretical framework idea is hard for a lot of us who are not trained in education research. I found the following analogy really helpful. Envision a biologist, chemist, and physicist examining together the dramatic effect of a fog tsunami over the ocean. A biologist may be concerned with the effect of fog on various species. A chemist may be interested in the chemical composition of the fog. Physicists may be focused on the refraction of light. So they're all observing the same thing, but they're all using different theoretical frameworks. All valid, but shedding light on different aspects of the phenomenon. So here is another study that I did with Patricia Halpin of the University of New Hampshire, presented at Voices last year, I think. And you probably don't have time to read over this entire introduction, but notice I'm talking in this introduction about creating community, enabling true dialogue, sharing genuine personal thoughts, connecting to students' personal interests. So based on that introduction, what kind of data do you think this study collected? That's my next question to you, non-rhetorically, so please type in your quick thoughts into the chat. And again, Larry, if you could summarize those as they come in. Based on this introduction, what kind of data do you think we are collecting here?
No responses yet. Do you want to give them a hint of what type of answer they should be giving?
Well, what do you think? I don't want to lead the witness too much here, but there's no wrong answer.
Someone said grades.
Grades, okay.
Survey and interview data.
Survey and interview data, okay. So what do you think we would ask them in an interview if we were interviewing them? Or what kinds of information would we hope to collect from a survey?
Sense of belonging, someone says.
Sense of belonging, okay. Well, perhaps it's fair to say that if we're interviewing students, we're not just measuring their test scores, right? We want to get something from them beyond just like, did you know the answer to this factual question? Okay, so reading this introduction, you might well think that we interviewed students about their sense of belonging, about connecting with other students, about the atmosphere, the climate of the class. So those are all reasonable thoughts. Now, what did we actually do? Well, if you look down to the lower part of this abstract, you see we basically gave them a little pre-test and a post-test on the facts covered in the lesson. We did not assess the sort of community spirit aspects, the sense of belonging aspects. So why do you think there was this mismatch between how the introduction of the paper was written and the data collected? You can take 30 seconds for speculation. Why this mismatch?
It must be the journal editor's fault, not yours.
Okay, well, good idea. But no, in fact, the authors are to blame here. Anyone go to write a paper and they realize that the data they have are not quite closely linked to the story they want to tell?
So we have some comments here that the community aspect is your theoretical lens, and someone else says the results changed your perspective.
Okay. Well, good ideas. I think, again, you're giving the authors too much credit here. What happened is that we designed the study very quickly, collected some data quickly, and then when we wrote it up, we realized that the things that interested us most were things that we hadn't actually formally studied and collected data on. So that happens all the time. No need to be super embarrassed about that. But if you have a theoretical framework from the beginning, you can avoid some of these problems. This verbiage about creating community and enabling true dialogue, these are things we came up with after the data collection was already complete. If we'd been thinking about those things from the beginning, we might have had a better aligned data set. So what Larry and I are trying to coach you on in Voices 22 are that all of these things, teaching tips, Sodal, Deber, they all have value. They're all publishable somewhere. But if you are trying to strive for Sodal or Deber, it's important to have clear goals, as opposed to just collecting the data that are convenient to collect. Think about what you really want to do, what you want to accomplish. Try to read the literature once in a while. And if you don't have this educational research expertise, maybe reach out to those who have more of it, so you don't have to do all of that reading yourself. Thanks so much. Larry and I are basically out of time, but we'll be happy to follow up with you as appropriate. Thanks.
Thanks, Ewan and Greg and Larry. We do have time for a couple of quick questions. Anybody would like to ask Greg or Larry a question? Well, people think I might have a question here, which would be, are there any plans to actually extend that study and ask the questions that you wanted to ask? Or what are the plans?
Right. So speaking of awkward fits, I'm giving this talk as someone who's basically kind of left the field of science and music. I'm now on to a different topic, so I am not personally planning to follow up. So thank you for the question. The answer is no. No follow-up. No follow-up allowed.
Then again, Michael Jordan came back to basketball, so.
Yeah.
Very good. I don't see any questions here in the Q&A or the chat. So, but thanks, Larry and Greg, once again for a brilliant talk. And now I'll pass it to Bob for another edutainment break, and see you in 10 minutes.